Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, we're going to be going over another starter for the 3.18 Sentinel League, and this is the return of one of my favorite builds ever, which is General Cry Blade Flurry Berserker. Now, this build is one that I get a lot of comments, a lot of people telling me their experience, and it's really black and white. I have people telling me they've downed all the content in the game. It's the best build I've ever played, and I also get the complete opposite. People telling me they can't get past level 80. They're dying in one maps to one shot, or in white maps to one shots. I get all of it, you know. So personally, what I think is that this build is a very player skill dependent. The better you are at actually playing the build, the more you're going to be able to do with the build. The number one rule when it comes to this build is that you are not a melee build. That's it. If you're playing this like you're an actual melee build, yes, you're probably going to have a hard time. You need to play this smart, and you need to play around your cooldown, and especially Berserk. If Berserk is up, you are very, very tanky. If Berserk is down, you are much less tanky. Still, not enough to just die to one-shots to anything, but definitely not as tanky. Okay, so what I'll do for the showcase here is I'll be showcasing a Maven. We're not going to do the whole thing for the sake of time. We're just going to do the first phase so you can see the sort of single target that you can expect on some pretty much day one gear. Now, let's look at that day one gear real quick. So we have an Ichimonji, which is a couple chaos. Abyssus, no enchant on that. Now, Redblade banner, I do have to give a disclaimer about that. Lighthouse is not on the Atlas once again, which means this shield is probably going to be expensive. Now, I have made some changes to this build since the previous league, quite a few changes actually. I tried to make it a lot more tanky and even cheaper, cut out the Enlighten and stuff like that. But what happens is this shield is expensive. One of the changes that we made, though, is that we are actually going to be able to change to General Cry much earlier on without having the shield. So instead of getting all the way up to like level 75 or 80 or however long you had to play with Spectral Helix, which is honestly not great if you're not actually, scaling it up, because we wanted to be planning for General Cry on our tree and stuff, it wasn't great. So what I did is I made it so you could actually swap into General Cry much earlier, around level 65 or so. So basically around the time you get to maps, you'll already be doing some General Cry action, which is going to feel a lot better than the Spectral Helix two-hander that we had going on last league, even if you don't have Redblade banner. I will say though, Redblade banner should be your number one priority and the first thing you purchase on this build after the couple, the few Chaos uniques like Abyssus and Ichimonji. The rest of the gears is just going to be life and resistance, so life res, life res, life res, life res, life, a bit of multi. And it's very important that we have 3 instances of minus mana cost, 1 for channeling, 2 for non-channeling. So if we did channeling here, we have the non-channeling here and the non-channeling here. Now this is just life and resistances, and this is just life and resistances. Quite a bit of resistance. This is a ring that I like to throw on every one of my showcases because it just helps round out all the resistances on any character at any time. So it just saves me some time trying to figure out, how to actually get the gear to cap out my resistances. Now, Ryslatha's Coil is a relatively expensive item. It's much cheaper than it used to be, especially early on, due to the fact that they added a divination card for it, but also due to the fact there's a lot of people who are doing Gwen and gambling. But for the sake of this showcase, we are just going to outright take it off. So you'll see the sort of damage that you can do even without that. So at this point, we're just rocking life and resistance gear through the entirety of our gear, and an Ichimonji and an Abyssus, and of course the Redblade banner. Now looking at our tree, we are rocking a single medium cluster, which is extremely cheap. Haunting Shout and Led by Example is pretty much the cheapest cluster, because these two notables are some of the highest weighting. So yeah, this should cost you no more than a few chaos. You might even just drop one that's already rolled like this on the ground. Because of how common these notables are, you could easily do some like alt spam into regals to make this yourself, or again, just buy it. No other jewels except for the fluid motion and a single jewel here with life and 1 multi. And the fluid motion is just to get a bunch of dexterity. We need a lot on this build, and it's pretty hard to get. So this helps us a lot with that until we get a brutal restraint later on. We'll talk about that when we go into the POB portion of the video. Everything else is just straight up on the tray, so no expenses there. Now, in terms of my gems and stuff, a lot of them are 2020, a lot of them are 20-0. So it's, obviously on the first day of a league, you probably wouldn't have level 20 gem, but you also probably wouldn't be doing Maven with gear that is this bad, right? So let's go into the showcase. We're just going to do the first phase and then we are going to look at the POB, leveling, all that good stuff. All right. So the way that we go about this is we're going to drop Assassin's Mark on her, which is now permanent. And then we are just going to hold down General Cry while we hold down Cyclone, put down our Ancestral Protector once in a while when it's up, and that'll be that. Alright, so put this down, put that down, and then we can just basically use our flasks, and then we can just spin to win. And that'll be that. Now, I'm going to try to intentionally kind of tank some mechanics, like these little balls or something. Just to showcase that, you know, you actually can take some hits. You don't have to play absolutely perfectly to play this build. It's definitely a, you know, it's not the squishiest build that people try to make it out to be, and the damage is pretty ridiculous. You know, this is on par with same levels of investment of, say, all Seismic, right? But it has the advantage of being a much faster mapper. Due to the fact that it has a lot of move speed, especially when we go into the higher budget versions. So that's kind of what you can expect out of this build in terms of single target, even on some day one gear. Survivability wise, we'll talk about that when we get into POB, which we're going to do right now. So looking at the notes, as always, I have a full guide on how to level. You're going to level with Spectral Helix all the way up until, I would say all the way up until... I think level 60-ish, 65 is when you're going to be swapping from Spectral Helix into General Cry. And yeah, you're going to have all the information, all the links, everything you need to know is there. It's also very important that when you're playing Spectral Helix, because you're playing two-handed physical Spectral Helix, we are going to be very important that you actually upgrade your weapons. So there's a list of the actual axe bases, and then you can just do the recipe for physical damage, which is listed here, and that should be more than enough to carry all the damage because Spectral Helix is just kind of busted. So looking at the tree, again, as always, when it comes to my League Start videos, I have many trees. So you're going to have all of the leveling from Brutus all the way up until level 64. And this is when I do the swap from Spectral Helix two-hander. So as you can see, we have the two-hander nodes there, two-hander, 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 into the respected General Cry at 64. We're going to grab the sword nodes instead. We're going to grab all of the mana reservation stuff as well at this point, because we're going to start running auras. Because before that with Spectral Helix, we were just running pretty much just Determination and Heralds, but at this point we're going to start running like Pride and stuff like that for damage. Then eventually you get to level 77 tree, and level 77 still doesn't have a cluster. The cluster comes in at around somewhere in your early level 80s. You'll grab the cluster. So this is your level 90 tree, and then you have the medium budget where we're going to go for a Brutal Restraint. We're going to talk about all that when we go into the items. High budget, nothing really changes. The only thing that changes is one of the clusters. All right, so looking at the actual skills, you're going to find 3 blocks of skills. You're going to find the budget setup, the medium budget, and the high budget. I didn't make a block for the actual leveling of Spectral Helix because all of that is in the leveling notes already. And let's be honest, there's already plenty of stuff to look at here. All right, next, looking at the actual items, we're going to go from budget all the way to high budget. So budget is what I just showcased: Ichimonji, Redblade Banner, Abyssus, and then just life and resistance over the entirety of your gear. Ryslatha's Coil once you can afford it, of course. Very important on a Ryslatha's Coil that you buy one that has more maximum damage than less minimum damage, right? Because if you end up buying, say, a 40% less minimum damage and a 30% more maximum damage, you'll actually end up doing less damage. So very important that you pay attention to that. I've seen people make that mistake of actually inverting those. In terms of flask, we're going to be rocking Quicksilver with the effective Chill and Freeze. Diamond Flask, of course, Lion's Roar. It's a bit of annoying because of the knockback, but it actually is kind of nice because it keeps monsters away from you, especially for the early stages of the build where you're a little bit more on the squishy side before you go to Brass Dome, especially against elemental damage and the fact you have no suppression. And then a Basalt for more armor. As you can see, even the extremely budget version of this build is rocking 60,000 armor. That's quite good. Cap suppression, or sorry, capped resistances, no suppression. That's one of the downsides of being on this side of the tree. Very hard to get suppression unless you want to get it all over your gear. That's very expensive early on, especially if you also want to get, you know, decent armor and stuff like that. But you could definitely go hybrid armor evasion gear and get suppression on, say, your body armor, and then your boots and your gloves, and you would have quite a bit, but you definitely wouldn't be capped. And then Chaos Resistance is definitely our kryptonite when it comes to the budget version. It's kind of impossible to get. You can't really fit it on your flasks either. So yeah, well, I guess you could drop the Basalt Flask. This takes you down to 44,000 armor, which is not bad. And then you could actually fit in some Chaos Resistance. That might actually be better. Realistically, you don't need Chaos Resistance unless you're fighting like Hunter mobs, which is no longer a problem because of Conqueror maps being isolated. Or if you're farming like Chiyula and stuff like that, feared, and at that point you would probably have positive Chaos Resistance, and you definitely would be doing a flask swap instead of Quicksilver. So I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it is something that you should try to get if you can, because as you can see, none of this gear has any of the Eldritch implicits, so you know you could definitely get some suppression on the implicits. You could definitely get some resistances, which will allow you to get suppression on your gear, stuff like that. Now, looking at the medium budget, things change quite a bit. The biggest change is Paradoxica. Now, Paradoxica, after you actually get the shield, Redblade banner is the #1 priority. You want to rush this as fast as possible. And you want to make sure that you have physical damage on the prefix. And for the budget version, or the mid-budget version, I should say, we're going to go with critical strike chance on the Paradoxica. And this is really, really good because it allows us to not have to worry about our crits. Now, because we're going to go with blitz charges. I'll talk about the ascendancies in a bit. Again, Redblade banner, Abyssus. At this point, we're going to go Brass Dome. Now, Brass Dome comes with a lot of armor. 4,000 armor, and it also gives us it also gives us take no extra damage from critical strikes, I believe, unless that's a legacy version. Well, I don't know if I have one, but I have a feeling that this is wrong. It should have take no extra damage from critical strikes, right? Brass Dome. Yeah, take no extra damage from critical strikes. There we go. So I'm not sure. I guess mine is legacy or something. That's weird. Which means that all critical strikes are going to hit you like regular hits, which is huge for survivability. It's going to prevent a lot of one-shots, so Brass Dome is amazing. It also comes with +5 max all res, which is also quite nice. It's basically 5% less damage taken when it comes to elemental damage, so not bad. And we do get some max res from Soul of Steel and a little bit more fire max res from Barbarism. Now, otherwise, this is a big change that I made to the mid-budget version because of the price of the gloves in the high-budget version, which is the Asenath Gentle Touch. I went with Oskarm. Now, the cool thing about Oskarm is it gives you trigger Assassin's Mark on hit, which is really, really nice because it means that you don't have to worry about that. It also comes with accuracy, a bit of life, a bit of spell suppression. It also helps you with crit. The downside is it has negative chaos resistance, which we're already struggling to get. So at this point, it's going to be very important that you use an Amethyst Flask because you're going to be even lower than -60 chaos resistance. And with this many uniques, it's hard to fit chaos resistance anywhere unless you have quite good items. And of course, this POB doesn't. This is super cheap stuff. It's going to be very important at this point because we have no attack speed on Paradoxica, and Paradoxica is a very slow weapon, that we get a pair of boots with Tailwind. Nothing else required, just Tailwind. Hyri's Truth is going to become our amulet of choice. Very, very good amulet. Gives us precision, has 100% mana reservation efficiency, and it also gives us a level 22 precision, which saves us a socket on our gems, and this build is quite socket starved. Res a life on our rings. Remember about the non-channeling and the channeling. What's important here is because we no longer can get the minus mana cost on the amulet since we're using a unique, is that we'll make up for that with a replica Conqueror's efficiency. Ryslatha is back as always. The same thing when it comes to the flasks. Now at this point, one of the big changes is that we are going to go into a large cluster setup. So we'll do a single large cluster. Now this is item level 50 minimum, and you can roll this yourself with either Jagged Fossils or Harvest Reforges for physical, and it's very easy to roll. Honestly, not that bad at all. You can accept pretty much any 3 notables, but these are probably what you're going to be looking for. Fortunately for you, these are some of the more common ones: Master Fundamentals, Battle Hardened, and Fierce Assault. At this point, we're also going to go with double medium clusters instead of single. And one of the big changes is that we actually get mob mentality. Now this is going to give us Warcries have 5% chance to get grants endurance, frenzy, or power charges. So obviously endurance charges makes us tankier. Frenzy charges is nice because it means that we no longer need the frenzy charge mastery, which we used to get, and power charges for more crit. Warning call, a lot of armor from this. Look at that, 15,000 armor from this bad boy. Really, really good there. Then Provocateur is going to give us crit chance and crit multi against taunted enemies. Warcries always taunt, or general cry anyways. So that's why we get this. And led by example for Onslaught. Actually, wait, no, this is the high budget. I should be looking at the mid budget. The only difference actually is that instead of getting Provocateur on the mid budget, we get Haunting Shout for Intimidate, because we don't have Awaken Melee Fizz to actually give us free Intimidate. Now, one thing to note is that you could actually just get it on your gloves, but since we're rocking Oskarm, we can't go with Eldritch Currency on the mid budget setup, so that's why we're going with this. These are also, when it comes to the medium clusters, these are all interchangeable, so you don't have to get Warning Call with Mob Mentality. You could get, say, Mob Mentality with Haunting Shout, and then led by example with Warning Call. If anything, if any of the combinations are significantly cheaper than other ones, then go for that. Okay, otherwise the tree stays pretty much the exact same, other than the fact that, as I was mentioning earlier, we're going to go with a Brutal Restraint at this point instead of our old jewel, which was giving us Fluid Motion for Dexterity. This is also going to give us Dexterity from all of the small nodes. It's not quite going to be as much as Fluid Motion, but it's pretty good. And it's very important that we get NASIMA on a Brutal Restraint for Second Sight. This gives us You Are Blind, but that actually doesn't matter. And it also gives us Blind does not affect your light radius, which doesn't matter. What does matter is 25% more melee critical strike chance while blinded. So this is amazing, because You're Blind doesn't really matter to us because we're not hitting. It's the actual Mirage Warriors which are hitting, and those guys aren't blind. So yeah, very, very good, notable right there. So make sure to get NASIMA on your Restraint. Now in terms of the skill setups, nothing really changes actually. From the budget to the mid-budget, the only change realistically is that we are able to run Ancestral Protector with War Chief and multiple totems in MAME, which we were not able to do on the super budget setup because we need to have our curse somewhere, so we can't use this MAME. That's really the only change. Everything else is basically the exact same. So, because we save a socket from the Hyrie's Truth, and we also save a socket from Oskarm, which allows us to, I believe I put a portal. Yeah, I put a portal in the weapon, but realistically you can do whatever you want with that last socket. Okay, and then finally we have the high budget tree. Again, the tree doesn't really change whatsoever, but what does change is the Paradoxica. We are going to be using an attack speed Paradoxica instead of the crit chance Paradoxica. Now this is significantly more expensive, and it's going to be pretty much one of the most expensive piece of gear on this setup. Of course, Redblade banner still. Abyssus at this point is going to get a helmet enchant, which is Berserk buff effect. Brass Dome, we can get a corruption. You don't need this, but it's nice. The 45% increased damage is by far the best corruption, because attack skills don't really benefit from gem levels much. Now at this point, we're actually going to go with the Asenath's Gentle Touch. Now the cool thing about Asenath is they come with intelligence, which is nice. They come with Temporal Chain, which is both a good offensive and defensive layer. So we definitely want to get this. We are going to go with the same sort of Tailwind boots. Asenath actually also comes with mana, which is going to be a big deal. I'll talk about that in a second. Now at this point, Hyrie's Truth, we used to use Panopticon in order to get a lot of attack speed from our Anoint if you look at the mid-budget setup or the low budget. Now we're actually going to be using Whispers of Doom, and the reason for that is because Asenath is going to give us Temporal Chain, which means we would not be able to use Assassin's Mark anymore. So we will need to get this this Anoint for the high budget setup, which means that our attack speed is going to suffer because we no longer get Panopticon, but this is made up for by the fact that we get attack speed on the Paradoxica instead. The rings are just going to be big life and resistance rings, still rocking the Ryslatha. The large cluster stays the exact same thing, the mediums as well, except like I said, you're going to go Provocateur instead of the Intimidate, because in the high budget we are going to go with Awaken Melee Fizz, which is going to give us Intimidate already. And we're also going to go with Awaken Brutality, which is going to give us Crush, which is really, really nice. Next, one thing that changes on the high budget setup is we're going to use an Enlighten, and the reason why we use an Enlighten, and it's very important that we get this Enlighten on the high budget setup, is because we are going to want to automate our Assassin's Mark with Mark on Hit. Now, the issue with Mark on Hit is it has a cost multiplier of basically 200%, which means 3 times more mana. So instead of Assassin's Mark costing like, 30 mana, it's costing a lot more. So it's very important that we actually have quite a bit of mana unreserved. So if I was to actually set this up, you'll see that we have about 80 mana unreserved. Meanwhile, on the budget and the mid-budget, we only need like 20 mana unreserved for this build to work perfectly fine. But once we want to automate Assassin's Mark, we need a little bit more. Now, if you don't mind casting Assassin's Mark yourself, you could drop the Mark on Hit, and you can also drop the Enlighten, which gives you back 2 sockets, which means that you can run multiple totems and Maim once more, which we had to drop a little bit earlier on. This still means, though, that you will need Whispers of Doom due to the fact that you're running Asenath's Gentle Touch. And again, Temporal Chains is really, really good offensively and defensively, and it's also really good for clearing because it gives us Explode. And General Cry doesn't have the best clear in the world. It's not bad, it's just not absolutely amazing. But once you do get Asenath's Gentle Touch, it becomes really, really good. So looking at the actual defensive layers on the budget POB, let's look at the budget POB. Now, the number that you're seeing in terms of damage, 33 million, that's not actually going to be right because the config right now is for the high budget. So it's not going to be quite 33 million. I think it's around 15 million or so. Once we do this entire setup, of course, this requires us to be getting 6 stages on our Blade Flurry. So it's optimistic DPS calculation, but it's realistic. You actually get a lot of damage. Because what I showcased earlier was a lot less damage than that, right? I didn't have my Ryslathas. And also, this is my old setup. It doesn't have all of the new stuff that I actually put into the build. So this does do more damage than what I showcased myself. But in terms of defenses, we have over 5,000 life, which is pretty respectable. We have a maximum hit taking of 72,000, which is actually higher than our effective health pool. So in terms of getting one-shotted, we are very, very tanky. If you get one-shotted, you probably got one-shotted by chaos damage. Because we have, 76 max res, 77 fire max res, 5,000 life. We don't have a ton of block, only 30% block, and we have no suppression, so spells do hit us quite hard, which is kind of the downfall of the budget setup. Now, looking at the medium budget, what's going to happen is our armor is going to shoot up to 65,000. Our life pool, however, is going to go down to 4,000, but our maximum resistances is going to be 81 and 82 for fire, and the big deal again though is chaos resistance. It is relatively hard to fit it on this build. The best place to put it is your rings, but if you do that, it means that you need to make up for the big resistances somewhere else, which means you'll probably need to end up getting some resistance rolls on your clusters and also potentially on your jewels and stuff like that a little bit more, because capping out your resistances is not easy when you have that many uniques with no real resistances on there, and it just makes it pretty hard, but it's definitely doable. And again, this is a build that I would highly recommend. I think it's a super solid starter, but just like my build from yesterday, I do need to give the warning that I don't think that this build is super good for newer players and casual players. This is more like a seasoned veteran who wants to push to super endgame bossing as fast as possible. This is faster than Seismic in terms of getting to the Feared, in terms of getting to Maven. It is actually in softcore the fastest build to get to the endgame bosses. And this is just due to the fact that it does ridiculous amounts of damage, and as soon as you slap a Paradoxica on it, it just melts everything. But yeah, as always, that's pretty much going to be it. I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters though: Rescroll, Brandon, welcome back, Thomas, Nate, The Great Master, Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Navgar, Solomon, Exo, Giracosta, and Bizen. So of course, anyone else who supported me in the past and anyone else who wishes to remain anonymous. If your name is not on there, as I said previously, it's because I haven't updated it yet. There's been a massive influx of new patrons, and I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for the support.